Good afternoon, traders and investors. It's Will back with another one of our daily market recaps. So today, big day. We had big earnings from major tech names here today, Microsoft and Google. We had some fear in the banking sector with FRC shedding almost 50% of its share price in a single day off some banking fears, potentially going into FDIC receivership. And we had some rally into Bitcoin because of that same fact, which we did see back in March. So without further ado, let's get into some charts here. So as we can see, guys, the S&P 500 bouncing off our support level here. Big red day today on the indexes here. Recovered a lot in the end of the day with our tech earnings here. But as you can see, we still have not broken our daily lows, which were set earlier in April here. Big red candle though, however, we are coming down into this area pretty hot. As you guys can see, MACD on the daily time frame is curling down. On the weekly chart, we are still looking for this weekly bull flag to play out. Still a lot of space. My put debit spread is still on, as a matter of fact, was up a significant amount on that trade here today. But we are going to leave it on pending some further earnings tomorrow from Meta. And then we have Amazon on Thursday. And obviously, big week next week, FOMC week, right? So as we can see, more specifically on the lower time frames, 4 hour almost got oversold here in the end of the day. Recovered a bit in the after hours though, but remains to see how that's going to play out tomorrow. So we did break our hourly downtrending channel. And as soon as we broke it, as you can see, bears just absolutely ran with it. It remains to be seen, guys, if the most likely scenario is potentially just going to be an hour lower high compared to this guy up here. And if we potentially go into a tightening range here, or if we roll over. So that's what I'm really going to be looking at tomorrow on the SPY. And it's even more magnified here if we take a look at our NASDAQ. So if you take a look at the NASDAQ here, it's even more pronounced, right? NASDAQ, we can clearly see we did lose the bottom end of this range. However, it's good for the bulls that we have so much support in this price zone right here, right? So as you can see, I did draw a line here, but if we want to make it a channel, I assume we can do something like this, to where this is really our range of support. So bears are going to have a really hard time pushing through this area, especially if we continue to get some good earnings. As you can see, just a slight little earnings pop brought us back up almost half of the entire day's move. So on the hourly, we were dropping literally since the open, candle after candle after candle, right into the close, closed right at the low, right? Just pure selling. RSI was pretty much maximum oversold here, down all the way to 16. And we got a nice little bounce going. But like on the SPY, remains to be seen. Are bulls going to be able to take it all back? Or are we potentially just going to set a lower high compared to this guy up here and then potentially either go into an equilibrium pattern or unfortunately continue our downtrend further into our big support level? On the weekly time frame though, still looking very healthy. I've been saying this for a while. Our higher low is down here. Still a lot of space here, guys, in this support zone to actually make that happen. So overall bullish on the longer time frames. However, the shorter time frames are struggling a bit. We really need to see the bulls regain the hourly trend frame, the time frame, by doing something like this and then resetting the hourly time frame to the upside. So we'll see how that takes place tomorrow on the QQQs. Going into the Dow Jones. Dow Jones also had a really kind of red day, but in the grand scheme of things, you don't really see it. I don't want to spend too much time on this chart because bulls still are really healthy. On the daily time frame, as you can see, we are holding. We're kind of getting close to our lows here. And if that does materialize here, we're going to have to take it up to the higher time frames and look for weekly consolidation like this. That would be just another indication that weekly consolidation is continuing, especially if it pours into some of the more value, some of the more defensive names. Moving on to the Russell here. Russell is getting towards our price zone. So finally, we get some movement on the Russell. So as you can see, over the past 2 weeks, we've been pretty much doing absolutely nothing here. But this leads us up into the trade that we wanted to take, right? So as you guys know now, if you've been watching my previous videos, my buy zone for the Russell is down in here. So if we do get some price action down into these lower end of the ranges here, this lower end of this massive range, I will be looking for some opportunities to write some puts in these levels. Today, they weren't quite ready. I wanted to see further continuation for tomorrow, especially with how we closed. Didn't want to take a position really before the earnings, especially if earnings would have been bad today, Microsoft and Google. This would have probably opened up really red tomorrow as well. But we'll see how we open tomorrow. This is definitely on the watch list. What I wanted to show you though is off a move like this, on FRC, right? Oh, sorry, I got too many lines on there. So off a move of this on FRC, we've literally came down, right? 50% of the entire move from yesterday, right? So this is very, very dangerous, guys, especially, you can say that the lower time frames are oversold. Yes, we're oversold on absolutely every single time frame at this point. However, you have to be careful, right? This bank, they only have about 13, 15 billion. I forget, it was about 13, 14 billion dollars of cash on hand, but they do have debts payable of around $100 billion of borrowed money. So they don't have enough money to pay it all back. So I had made a play on earnings on this yesterday. Lucky enough, I was able to get up early in the morning, close for about a 30, 35% profit on my positions. And lucky I did, because early in the afternoon, we got some really, really bad news that the bank was potentially going to go under FDIC receivership. Basically, that's a fancy way of saying that if that happens, if the Fed does take control of the bank, the same thing is going to happen as Silicon Valley Bank. The share price, guys, unfortunately, will go to zero. And be very, very, very careful with stocks like this. I know you want to play it because the risk to reward seems good, but I mean, this does actually have risk of the share price going to zero. And be very careful on the options, guys, because if you do hold puts on this and it goes to zero and gets delisted, you won't be able to cash out the premium on the puts. So be very, very, very careful if you are in this play. I wish you the best of luck. But once again, my advice is to be very, very careful on plays like this. Don't want to see you guys get taken out on something like that. So moving on to the rest of the financial sector. Financials today, biggest red day that we've seen in a while, right? Arguably the biggest red day that we've seen pretty much since the banking crisis, those 2 weeks of banking crisis, right? But it was to be expected. We had been predicting for this. Like I was saying, guys, if you look on the weekly, we've been going up for about 5-6 weeks in a row. And what we wanted to see, the most likely scenario off a massive down move like this is a lower high. So the lower high was set. Now remains to be seen if we want to go set a lower low, or if we potentially are able to hold this low, set something around here, maybe consolidate, right? And then potentially resume a new weekly uptrend. So that would be the best case scenario for the bulls. But as of now, guys, I'm targeting the lower end of this range as well. If I want to be writing any options, I don't want to get too close to here. I really want to give the bears their chance to swing at bat here and see how aggressively are we going to come down into here. It's not only location, it's how aggressively. If we come into here really, really, really hot, do you think I'm going to be targeting this area? Probably not. I'll probably go lower. But if we kind of hesitate like this and start moving down, stuff like that, well, that's when I really want to approach a trade like this on XLF. So XLF, right? Now we're starting our daily consolidation move. We've just filled this gap here. Remains to be seen if we get some more negative banking headlines over the course of this week and potentially next week. Expect XLF as consequentially to come down. And some of our major names in the sector, like JP Morgan, right? So JP Morgan has a large gap to fill here, guys. And that wouldn't be surprising that if they do get negative headlines in the banking sector as a whole, that, traders do come down and fill this gap here. Not many things were doing good today in terms of the banking sector, right? So Goldman Sachs pulling down a bit, Morgan Stanley as well pulling down a bit. So they do have room, guys. They do have room, but we're playing against negative banking headlines and, depositor worries and credit worries. So whenever you have macro bad headlines like this, you kind of have to really take a step back and figure out if you want to play them while it's happening or if you want to take a step back. Personally, myself, I always like taking a step back, which is why I'm looking how aggressively do we come down into the bottom of this range. Moving on to healthcare. Healthcare, was playing defense today. Big red day on healthcare, obviously. All of our sectors here were pretty much in the big red today. And healthcare, conversely to other sectors, they have a lot of space that they can afford to give back before setting a weekly higher low and potentially resuming our weekly uptrend. So I'm going to be looking out for that. The theme of the week, guys, like I've been saying, is weekly consolidation. It's what I'm expecting. So as you can see, this was the first day that we've actually started the whole process. So I'm not too nervous. We may lose the daily uptrend, right? We may lose this guy and come down lower. We may lose the daily uptrend, but as long as the weekly uptrend is still intact and bears don't cut too deep into this move, then we can potentially start a weekly uptrend and resume to some higher levels. If not, we're really just stuck in this massive range, right? So it's kind of like a weekly uptrend potential within a massive range. So the names that came out today, let's start off with Apple, even though they didn't report. So Apple, I still have my put debit spread on because I was expecting some downside continuation for the markets, which we did get. However, Microsoft and Google were able to bring that up today, and even Amazon was up after hours. Even Apple is green at slightly after hours, right? So Apple does have a lot of room. They don't have earnings, but if ever, the rest of our names, right? So as I was saying in QQQ, if we do end up tomorrow setting somewhat of a lower high and then coming to the downside, well, Apple won't be immune to that. Apple may continue its trend to the downside here, guys. Still a lot of room to move on the stock. Still overall weekly bullish. I'm just looking down for a movement in the 150s. That's where I really want to take profit on this put and be looking for some options right into this area right here, right? So looking on now to, let's do Amazon first because they didn't report yet. So Amazon started off the week, 2 big red days in a row, right? It's now giving back almost 5%, pretty much 5%, right? Off the highs of the move. Still a lot of space for bulls to be working with. We are still holding our short-term daily time frame EMAs here. On the weekly, it is still looking good. We do still have a lot of space. I wouldn't be opposed to seeing Amazon roll down into the high 90s. We're going to see what happens to earnings. Amazon's moves are probably going to be fairly muted with earnings. Tomorrow, they'll really move off of what Microsoft and Google do and the rest of the tech space, right? But for a big move on Amazon, either cracking this high or cracking these lows here, we're really going to have to wait till Thursday earnings. So that's pretty much it for Amazon right there. Microsoft, right? Big red day. Another big red day for Amazon. As we were expecting, guys, in the previous videos, I was expecting Amazon to come down here into our moving averages. It's doing it almost perfectly. We have big levels of support right here if I come down to the daily time frame and show you guys. So this whole area is a very big area of support, right? Anywhere from the mid 260s to 272-ish. And as you can see, we got not really fairly close to it, about 275 right before, and then shot back up to the high end of this range. But we are not yet past this 290 range, right? Earnings took us up to 290. Remains to see if tomorrow we do get follow through on that. Very big move, but as you can see, guys, still struggling with resistance. Even earnings was not able to break this resistance. So remains to be seen if Microsoft can continue to push higher tomorrow off of its good earnings, or if it just gets brought down with the rest of the tech index and broader market sentiment. But very good numbers. They beat pretty much across the board, decent guidance. So I'm not too worried for Microsoft for the long term. It's one of the best companies in the entire index. Google. Now Google, same thing kind of as Microsoft, right? They had a very bad day, minus 2%, came right down into our moving averages, didn't really lose these levels here, which were our major areas of support with the moving averages. Lower area of support, obviously around that $100 range. But look at the move in after hours, same thing as Microsoft. We are still struggling with my purple line resistance here, the 109s, right? As you can see, tried to move up into it with earnings, got rejected. Now we're closing a tiny bit lower in the after hours, about 107. So same thing for Microsoft. If Microsoft and Google cannot push through their respective resistances tomorrow, it leads me to believe that the tech sector as a whole still has a bit more to come down, and that these moves were not enough to start an entire bullish momentum in. Now, one thing I did want to say, guys, is last time the banking crisis happened in March, you remember there was a big rally into tech for safety. So it remains to be seen if we get a rotation out of XLF and into QQQ. If we get a rotation out of XLF and into QQQ, it may contribute to keeping our SPY relatively flat or maybe only slightly down, or it may SPY may even go green potentially. But one of those sectors is going to take a hit. However, if they both drop, if tech and XLF financials start dropping, we'll be very careful. That means that the weekly consolidation on SPY is not yet finished, and we may be in for some potential future downside in that. Now, moving on to our semiconductor names, guys. Semiconductors, NVIDIA finally cracking the lows, not by much, cracking the lows of this range here. So this is the trade, if you ever want to, looking for bearish entries on NVIDIA, this is the trade that I was telling you guys about yesterday. I want to see a potential move down here, retest, and that's where I would enter my short right here and then put my stops above this range here. That's a breakout retest trade. I would rather play that than play the sheer breakout trade. But semiconductors as a whole, if you look at the actual ETF for it, we're pulling down in the lower end of this range. How are we doing it, guys? We're coming down into it aggressively coming down into it, right? So if we take out this low here on our weeklies and we start pulling into that, well, expect semiconductors as a whole to go into some further consolidation. At that point, sucks to say, but we would have lost the weekly uptrend. There's not much left on this weekly uptrend before we can potentially lose it. What bulls really want to see is we really want to hold this area and continue a potential consolidation area at the higher end of this range. Bulls do not want to see this area lose, but names like Nvidia with so much space to run to the downside could contribute to it. If you see AMD has broken our upward channel, I can pretty much almost delete this now, right? And we're now kind of rolling over into the lower levels. So even AMD has some space still, but we're rolling over into our weekly lower area here. This guy's in control still currently. As we push further and further down, bulls really want to see us hold there. We do have support from the 200 weekly moving average, but as you can see, guys, on the daily, clear downtrend. We are pushing down to some of the lower levels on the RSI here. Lower time frames are getting slightly oversold, so there may be a short-term bounce play if the rest of the broader markets do well tomorrow. But for now, bears are in control of daily timeframes and under. And you can see it in the rest of the sector as well. ON Semiconductor pushing below my target range. I didn't like how aggressively we were coming down into it, right? So that's why I chose not to make any plays on this today. ON Semiconductor rolling over from the entire range. As you can see on the weekly, we are now coming towards the lows. We still have a decent amount of space to deal with before this is taken out, but rolling down aggressively, right? Even companies like Intel that benefited a lot recently, now 4 weeks in a row have they been pulling back. We're now back within our range in Intel. So be cautious on semiconductors. If I have one little advice, is to be cautious with the semiconductor trade right now. The market seems to be rotating out of semiconductors in favor of some more defensive and value plays. So one thing I wanted to talk about, guys, with the downturn with the negative headlines in the banking crisis, we saw Bitcoin explode immediately, right? So if you look at FRC, when did the news come out that they would really start coming into potential receivership here was at 1 o'clock, right? It wasn't holding, but it wasn't excessively dropping, right? So we were kind of holding here. The regional banks, you could see it better on KRE. So KRE, right? We were relatively holding. It was down, but the entire markets were down, right? But nothing crazy. But then after those headlines came out that a few banks were still under the guise of FDIC receivership, which basically means the Fed can take control of the bank and decides what to do with the bank, either going to force other banks to potentially buy into the business, or literally just going to call back on its obligations, and the bank will unfortunately have to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. So as you saw, when it dropped hard like that, as soon as that happened, you had a big rise in Bitcoin. This trade is now back on. So we've been waiting for a potential lower area on Bitcoin. We've been waiting for bears to exhaust their move to the downside, something which has been done, right? So we did have a break of this range here down low without much follow through, came right back coming into it, tightening. And now we've closed two big 4-hour candles above our short-term moving averages. We're above the 200 4-hour moving average as well. We're now touching our daily moving averages. So bulls have now created a lot of space that if we were going to do something like this, we have a lot of space now to confirm our first hourly uptrend since the drop. We had so far not confirmed an hourly uptrend. Now we just put in an hourly uptrend. What do you want to see? I'm not saying it can keep going, but we do want to see bulls eventually confirm that, and confirm that as well on the 4-hour, right? And then you move up the time frames, guys. Then you can say, okay, then we can resume a potential daily uptrend as well. The weekly, obviously, as I was saying, the weekly still looks healthy. We had a lot of space, right, for our moving averages on the weekly, and our weekly higher low is way down here, right? So a lot of space. Bulls are feeling confident, and we hit that rotation back into crypto whenever we get these negative banking headlines. So look out for that. If we do keep getting those negative bank headlines, crypto may just be a hedge play that continues to run here and potentially continues to push back up. Now, the most likely move could potentially be, because this move was such a big drop, we could only see a move like this for a potential lower high and then consolidation and get back into a range. So that's not out of the question. I'm not saying we're going to V-shape to all-time highs, but that, we are now, it's one step at a time, guys, one step at a time. Reverse the hourly, reverse the 4-hour, and then we go for the daily uptrend resumption confirmation. We'll see if we can get that, or if bulls, unfortunately, have to stay maintained in this range with an equilibrium pattern like this on the daily time frame. The one thing that leads me to believe that we could get bullish continuation to the upside is the weekly time frame is still extremely bullish. Extremely bullish weekly time frame, guys. So just that alone could lead me to believe that if we do consolidate maybe on the daily, it may not be long before we get a weekly punch back above. So that's everything pretty much that I wanted to talk to you guys about. Tomorrow we do have Meta earnings, so look out for Meta, right? Meta has been coming down over the last 2 weeks. We have a lot of space on the weekly before our moving average area, a lot of space before we would potentially set a weekly lower low. So it remains to be seen if tomorrow Meta can break the higher end of this range with their earnings, or if they report bad, how far will they come down? You don't want to see them come down too low into the bottom end of this range, because then our weekly bulls will have lost a lot of momentum. Watch out for this RSI kind of curling over a bit. MACD does seem like it wants to curl over a bit too. So Meta's going to be the one to watch for tomorrow at least. So I hope you guys had a good day. I hope you guys didn't put too much risk on the table for this week, because as I said, it's very, very dangerous going into earnings with large position sizes, because despite how much research you may put into a stock, despite how much you may analyze the fundamentals, it may not play out that way. A company that did that today is, look at Enphase, right? Look at Enphase. So Enphase set the weekly, they set the daily trend reversal pattern. They had been doing a good job of setting the weekly trend reversal pattern as well for some potential continuation. Daily was holding at the higher levels above our downtrending channel here, above the moving averages. And look what happened with earnings. They beat on revenue. They beat on margins. They beat on EPS, everything up. The one thing that brought them down is they revised Q2 earnings to the downside by about 10%. They revised it. Expectations were about 780 million revenue for next quarter. They revised it down to 700 million. So that was a 10% revision in earnings to the downside. And look how badly they crushed share price. The expected move was about 10%. And you see Wall Street has taken this all the way down to 16%. Now to the low end of our range here of the past couple months, right? Now down to the low end. So Enphase is going to be a play that I'm looking out for to write some puts tomorrow, because the premium should be fairly juicy. I'm going to be targeting anything in the 160 range. So the 160 range right about here is my next level that I'm looking for support, between here and about here. So anything in this range is going to be a target range. I'm going to look for the put premiums, see how much premiums are on the contracts for either this Friday or the Friday after. But these are the ranges that I'm kind of targeting now. We're going to see if we do get some downside continuation, more downside continuation, or if it tapers off and kind of pulls a Netflix. But one thing for sure, guys, with such a big drop, this whole thing will be an eventual gap to fill. So that is something to look for the upside for bulls in the future. There will be a large gap here that will need filling eventually. But as I said, I'm going to be looking for plays right in here. And we do have our 200 week moving average at this point at 160. So the 160 range is really where I'm going to be targeting, writing some potential options. As I said, we're going to look at the premiums tomorrow. So hope you guys had a good day. I love you all. Don't overtrade. Don't overthink things. If you're getting nervous, if you're getting too emotional, it's good to sit on the sidelines for these big weeks. And don't forget, next week is another massive, massive week. Next week, we either get the Fed pivot to where they stop increasing rates, or we get more information at least. If they do increase another 25, we may see what their plan is for the remainder of the year. We're going to get to see Jerome Powell's tone. Is he bullish? Is he bearish on the markets? What does he think of the recent upticks in unemployment? What does he think of the recent downticks in inflation? So we really need to see the Fed next Wednesday on their interpretation of all this. And we have the biggest stock in the entire market reporting next week, Apple. And Apple, like I said, we were going over early in the video, good earnings would put this to a higher end of our range here, which would put us very close to all-time highs. But anything bad from Apple could drag them down, potentially 5% or more. And that would put a big weight to the downside on the indexes. So look out for that. As I've showed you guys, I've been playing the VIX, got a nice little pop here on my VIX calls. And I'm probably going to be holding them because we do still have a lot of uncertainty. We got the banks, we got the FOMC next week. Some earnings are off the table, but a lot more. So it's remaining to be seen what's going to happen with all that. However, I feel confident. My calls are about 2 weeks out. Basically takes us to the end of all this uncertainty. So I want to see if more uncertainty comes on the table in the next few days. I will be compensated for that through the VIX. So hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, consider liking, consider subscribing, and I'll catch you guys tomorrow. Have a good one.